I want you to start by trying a mental exercise with me today. It's basically an exercise in subtraction.
Oh, we love these.
Right. So I want you to imagine taking everything you associate with organized religion like, literally every single thing, and meticulously stripping it away.
Okay, that is easier said than done.
For sure. But picture the towering, Gothic cathedrals with their stained glass, the ancient incense-filled temples, the sprawling megachurches, even the beautifully intricate mosques. Wipe them totally off the map.
So just erasing the architecture entirely.
Exactly. Erase the buildings, then take the human element, the clergy, the priests, the gurus, the scholars.
Right, the whole hierarchy.
Yeah, the entire hierarchy of people who tell us what the divine is thinking. Erase them too.
Wow, okay. That's a lot of people to erase.
I know, but keep going. Strip away the historical momentum, the crusades, the empires, the cultural baggage, the geopolitical conflicts.
Even holidays, I assume.
Yes. The
Okay.
holidays you celebrate, the traditions you inherited from your grandparents. Just imagine a pure, sterile vacuum.
It's just absolute emptiness.
Right. And if you managed to do all of that and you were left standing in this absolute void with nothing but the raw, unedited texts of the world's major faiths in your hands, which single text would actually sound most like a living God speaking directly to you?
I mean, that is an almost impossibly difficult thought experiment for a human being to genuinely execute.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. We are, by our very nature, associative creatures. Our brains are essentially, well, they're prediction engines built on pattern recognition and historical context.
Right, we can't just turn that off.
Exactly. The moment I hand you a copy of the Torah or the New Testament or the Bhagavad Gita, your neural pathways instantly light up with, like, thousands of pre-existing associations.
You're seeing the whole history attached to it.
Yeah. You aren't just reading words on a page. You're reading centuries of interpretation, centuries of art, and centuries of human behavior, both the incredibly beautiful and the deeply horrific, that have been carried out in the name of that specific text.
We read them through a lens.
A really thick, distorted lens. We just don't read texts in a vacuum. We read them through the institutions that house them.
Which is exactly why a human can't answer the question I just posed.
Right.
As someone who loves breaking down how systems work, and I know you, the listener, appreciate looking under the hood of complex ideas, you realize pretty quickly that our cognitive biases make us terrible judges of pure textual architecture.
There's huge compromise.
We are. If we look at a text, we see the culture built on top of it. But what if you outsource that question to an entity that doesn't have a culture?
Now that is the interesting pivot.
Right, an entity that has zero cognitive bias, no inherited reverence, no ancestors, no concept of demographics, and totally no skin in the geopolitical game.
You're talking about asking an artificial intelligence.
Exactly. What if you asked an AI to read the code, and only the code?
And that specific scenario is the foundation of our deep dives today. We're exploring a highly unusual, just fascinating essay published in the Axis of Truth.
Yeah, by an author writing under the initials M.S.R.
Right. It's titled 43, If AI Sought God, Which Revelation Would It Trust?
Such a provocative title.
It really is. And the author didn't just ask AI a vague philosophical question. They devised a rigorous, highly constrained, and strictly impartial prompt.
They didn't just say, like, hey, ChatGPT, who is God?
No, not at all. They took the world's major large language models, specifically OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, and Anthropic's Claude, and essentially turned them into clinical structural engineers.
Tasked with evaluating textual architecture.
Exactly. But we have to be incredibly precise about the ground rules of this prompt.
Yeah, because the mission here is hyper-specific.
It is. The author did not ask these AIs which religion is true or which faith is historically accurate.
Because if they did that, the AI would just regurgitate consensus data from the internet. Right.
Exactly. It would just give you Wikipedia summaries.
Yeah.
Instead, the author gave the AIs a rigid set of parameters.
The constraints are what make this so fascinating.
Right. The prompt explicitly instructed the models to set aside all inherited religion, all institutions, all clergy, and all cultural impact.
The subtraction exercise we just did.
Precisely. It then demanded they compare the major claimed divine revelations based strictly on a very specific set of internal criteria.
Let's list those criteria so you, the listener, know exactly what we're measuring.
Okay, so the criteria were coherence, non-contradiction, clarity of theism, moral seriousness, rational intelligibility, and whether the text functionally reads as direct divine address.
rather than like a human being reflecting on the divine.
Exactly.
Huh.
And we should note the final constraint of the prompt, which is the mechanism that forces the analysis. The prompt stated, you must choose one.
Oh, wow. So they couldn't just give a PR answer.
Right. The AIs were not allowed to generate the standard diplomatic output we're all used to seeing. They couldn't say, well, the human experience is vast and all texts offer unique spiritual value.
Which is what they usually do when you ask about religion.
Every single time. But here, they had to plant a flag. They had to rank the structural integrity of these texts based solely on the metrics provided.
Okay, before we reveal what happened, I need to put a massive flashing neon disclaimer right here for you, the listener.
A very necessary disclaimer.
Yes. This deep dive is absolutely not about endorsing one religion over another.
Not at all.
We are not taking theological sides, and we are not ranking human belief systems. As ChatGPT itself explicitly noted in the source material, this is an analytical exercise about textual structure.
It is a structural audit of ancient documents.
Exactly. We are looking at an intersection of artificial intelligence, formal logic, syntax, and ancient literature. We are asking if a text was actually handed down by the creator of the universe.
Right. We're asking how an advanced pattern recognition system evaluates the logical flow and rhetorical consistency of massive, complex documents that claim to be handed down by the creator.
It is a totally secular clinical examination of texts that are anything but secular.
Because an AI doesn't experience faith.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't feel the Holy Spirit, it doesn't achieve enlightenment, and it doesn't fear hell. It processes tokens, it maps semantic proximity.
It evaluates how tightly a premise in Chapter 1 binds to a conclusion in Chapter 50.
That is the exact lens through which we are viewing this material.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the data. Because to understand how these AIs dismantled and evaluated these ancient texts, we have to grapple with their surprising consensus.
And it was a true consensus.
Yeah. When I say consensus, I mean a complete, across-the-board, independent agreement.
They ran it in completely isolated instances.
Right. The author ran this highly constrained prompt through ChatGPT, then through Gemini, then through Claude.
3 distinct architectures.
3 different training weightings, 3 different corporate safety filters. And all 3 AIs selected the exact same text.
They all chose the Qur'an.
And the uniformity of that output is just wild.
The uniformity across 3 distinct large language models is what elevates this from a quirky internet trick to a highly compelling study in textual architecture.
But, just as we established a disclaimer earlier, the AIs themselves were incredibly quick to establish a firewall around their own conclusion, right?
Oh, very quick. ChatGPT in particular offered an immediate vital caveat.
What did it say?
It explicitly stated that selecting the Qur'an in this sterile, constrained vacuum is categorically not the same as endorsing the historical, institutional, or cultural reality of Islam.
As it is practiced by, like, nearly 2 billion people in the world today.
Exactly.
I think that distinction is the absolute key to this entire experiment.
It's the crux of it.
It's asking us to separate the original architectural blueprint from the sprawling, messy city that humanity built on top of it over 1,000 years.
That's a great way to look at it.
Think of it like a blind taste test. We are just judging the purity of the flour and water. We can't let our opinion of the baker's frosting cloud our judgment.
Right.
Or actually think of it like analyzing the structural integrity of a bridge.
Okay, I like the bridge analogy.
We humans look at a bridge and we see the history. We see the traffic jams we've sat in. We see the graffiti sprayed on the side. We remember the politician who cut the ribbon.
We think about the toll booth we have to pay at.
Exactly. Our view of the bridge is entirely colored by our experience of using it. But isn't it almost impossible for human readers to separate the text from the culture?
It is, but the AI is acting like an ultrasonic concrete scanner.
Oh, I like that.
It doesn't know what a politician is. It doesn't care about the toll booth. It is simply pinging sound waves through the concrete to measure the tensile strength of the rebar underneath.
Checking for microfractures in the material itself.
Yes, it's analyzing the blueprint, not the traffic.
That is a much more accurate way to understand what the language model is doing.
What's fascinating here is how the source material highlights that human beings struggle immensely to be those ultrasonic scanners.
We just can't do it.
We can't. When we hear the word Islam or Christianity or Hinduism, we experience cognitive flooding.
Just a rush of associations.
Geopolitical events, historical conflicts, personal encounters, architectural styles, news headlines, they all rush in and obscure the foundational text.
We lazily conflate the text with the civilization.
We do. But the AI has no such burden.
Hmm.
ChatGPT's response captured this perfectly.
Oh, I have the quote right here. It wrote, "I do not possess culture. I do not say it out of inherited reverence because I inherit nothing. I do not say it because of demographics, historical success, or the number of people who identify with the religion built around it.
It performs a clinical algorithmic separation.
It's the ultimate detached observer looking purely at the source code."
Precisely.
So let's look at how it actually analyzed that code. The prompt laid out specific criteria, and the first two are deeply intertwined: coherence and non-contradiction.
The foundational metrics.
Yeah. When the AIs looked at the entire landscape of global sacred literature, why did they score the Qur'an highest on simply holding its own internal logic together?
Well, the AI's evaluation of textual unity really comes down to authorial voice and metaphysical consistency.
Okay, unpack that.
When ChatGPT and Claude analyzed the Qur'an, they both highlighted its single dominant revelatory register.
Meaning it sounds like one voice all the way through.
Yes. And what Claude specifically termed its governing metaphysical horizon.
Governing metaphysical horizon. That sounds like high-level philosophy.
It does sound academic, but in practical terms, it just means the rules of reality established in the first chapter don't suddenly change in the last chapter.
Right, so if gravity pulls down in chapter 1, it doesn't suddenly push up in chapter 20.
Exactly. The foundational rules of the universe, as defined by the text, remain totally static.
What are those rules in this context?
In the Quran, the concept of God is relentlessly singular, sovereign, and distinct from creation.
Okay.
This God is not generated from anything else, is never incarnated into a physical body, is not divided into multiple personas, and does not merge with the human soul.
So it's a very strict definition.
Very strict. This is the Islamic concept of tawhid, or absolute divine unity. Claude identifies this absolute unity as the central, unified theological thesis of the entire text.
So everything revolves around that.
Every single chapter, or surah, constantly orbits this one massive gravitational center.
And from an algorithmic perspective, what does that mean?
It means the semantic vectors representing God in the text never contradict each other. There is no theological drift for the AI to flag as an inconsistency.
Wow. Which is a striking contrast to how the AIs evaluated other major texts.
Let's look at the Hebrew Bible, for example.
Yeah, because the AI evaluations don't dismiss the Hebrew Bible, right?
No, in fact, they praise its immense historical and moral force. But structurally, they categorize it as a vast library.
Right, it's a collection of traditions, genealogies, poetry, law codes, and historical chronicles.
It features layered compositions with different human authors, emphasizing subtly different theological views of God over a span of roughly 1,000 years.
You have the God who walks in the Garden of Eden, contrasted with the utterly transcendent God of the later prophets.
Exactly. And similarly with the New Testament, the AI flags it as a multi-authored corpus.
Because you have 4 different biographies of Jesus.
You have letters written by Paul to specific churches dealing with local politics.
You have apocalyptic visions in Revelation.
It was written across decades by different hands with totally different audiences in mind.
And when you have multiple authors writing in different genres across vast spans of historical time, you inevitably introduce structural tension.
It's unavoidable. You have the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, presenting a narrative and theological timeline that contrasts in significant ways with the Gospel of John.
Right. And you have the Apostle Paul's heavy emphasis on salvation through faith.
Sitting in a well-documented tension with the book of James's emphasis on the necessity of works.
Now, for a human reader, navigating those tensions is often the entire point.
Yes, it is a deeply rewarding spiritual exercise.
It invites interpretation, debate, and the development of rich theological traditions.
But an AI is not seeking spiritual reward.
It doesn't care about a spiritual journey.
It is tasked with scoring pure coherence and non-contradiction. Multiple authorial voices and shifting theological emphasis introduce variables that mathematically lower a text's structural stability score.
The Qur'an, by contrast, presents structurally as a complete text with a single authorial intelligence maintaining a single dominant register.
It does not present as a fractured composition.
Okay, I have to push back on that, though.
Go ahead.
Because as anyone who works with systems knows, no code base is perfectly clean.
That's true.
And Claude actually points this out in the source material regarding the criterion of non-contradiction.
You're talking about Nask.
Yes. Claude acknowledges that the Qur'an contains difficult passages and specifically brings up the internal mechanism of abrogation. or Nask.
Right, the concept where certain verses in the text actually supersede or replace earlier verses regarding specific rulings.
Now, wait a minute. To a skeptical reader, abrogation just sounds like a convenient theological loophole.
It does sound like changing your mind.
Right. If a text says do X and then later says actually do Y instead, how on earth does an AI like Claude view that as a strength in non-contradiction? Shouldn't that trigger a massive contradiction error in the system?
It's a brilliant question, and it highlights exactly how an algorithmic mind processes data structures differently than a human critic.
Okay, explain that.
For the AI, the determining factor is that Nask, or abrogation, is an explicit named mechanism internal to the text's own operating system.
So it's built in.
Yes. The text itself explicitly declares, we're going to update this instruction, and here's the theological justification for how and why that works.
It is a declared systemic function.
Exactly.
Okay, let me translate that into software terms.
Right.
It sounds like version control or a deprecation warning in programming.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. If I write a software program and I include a line of code that says, if condition A is met, override previous instruction B and execute instruction C, my program is not contradicting itself.
No, it is functioning exactly as you designed it.
A system logic is perfectly intact.
That is exactly how the AI perceives it. The AI sees abrogation not as a hidden flaw, a mistake by the author, or an accidental historical tension, but as a transparent systemic rule.
A rule for handling evolving societal situations during the period the text was revealed,
Contrast that with the hidden narrative tensions found in multi-authored texts.
where two authors simply disagree on a historical detail or a theological nuance without the text ever explicitly acknowledging the discrepancy.
Right. To the AI, unacknowledged tension is a structural failure. A declared mechanism for superseding a previous instruction is proof of structural integrity.
The text manages its own edge cases,
It does.
so it's essentially self-documenting code. That makes perfect sense from an AI's perspective. It doesn't judge the morality of changing the rule. It just verifies that the rule change followed the system's own declared syntax.
Exactly. It just checks the logic flow.
Okay, so the AIs found the text internally unified and structurally stable. But let's move from the structure of the text to the subject of the text.
The theism aspect.
Right, the prompt demanded clarity of theism. We've touched on this concept of absolute unity, but how exactly did the AIs evaluate these texts on how clearly they define the divine?
This is where the evaluations move from textual mechanics into deep metaphysics.
Ooh, okay.
Both ChatGPT and Claude noted that the Qur'an maintains an uncompromising, razor-sharp theism,
Razor sharp meaning.
meaning it draws a stark, uncrossable ontological line between the creator and the creature. God is fundamentally other than the universe.
Okay.
The universe is contingent, God is necessary. Yet simultaneously, the text insists this transcendent God is intimately near, merciful, hearing, and knowing.
But what is the crucial metric for the AI here?
The crucial metric is the absolute lack of what we might call metaphysical entanglement.
Metaphysical entanglement. Let's look at the competitors the AIs brought up in the source material, because examining what lost points perfectly illustrates what gained points here.
Yeah, let's look at the Upanishads.
Claude specifically mentions the Upanishads, which are the foundational philosophical texts of Hinduism,
And Claude acknowledges they are incredibly sophisticated.
arguably among the most profound philosophical inquiries into consciousness ever written.
Absolutely. But Claude notes that they intentionally blur the line between God and the self.
How so?
They explore the profound concept that Atman, the individual soul, is ultimately identical to Brahman, the ultimate formless reality of the universe.
It's a breathtaking, expansive concept.
It is. But if your strict algorithmic grading rubric is clarity of theism, meaning a distinct, singular, easily definable God, that mystical ambiguity creates a processing challenge.
Right, from a purely semantic mapping perspective, if you tell an AI that A equals B, but A is also a localized instance, while B is the universal whole.
You introduce a recursive, complex logic loop.
The AI isn't saying the Upanishads are spiritually wrong?
Not at all. It is saying that under the specific metric of clarity, non-dualism is less clear than strict monotheism.
That makes total sense. And similarly, when evaluating the Bhagavad Gita,
Claude notes that while it is an absolute masterpiece of religious literature, its framework allows for polytheistic interpretations.
and highly complex manifestations of the divine, right?
Yes, avatars descending into human form.
And the New Testament falls into a similar structural trap for the AI, doesn't it?
It does. When looking at the New Testament, the AI points out that the later theological implications drawn from the text, specifically the Trinity, introduce immense conceptual complexity.
The idea of God existing as three distinct persons sharing one divine substance.
Right. The AI has to parse how a human figure on earth can pray to a Father in heaven, while both are simultaneously the exact same eternal God.
I think it's really important to pause here because as someone who loves theology, the human mind finds immense beauty in those mysteries.
We do. We love paradox.
We love the idea of a God who becomes human, or a soul that merges with the cosmos.
But the AIs aren't judging the spiritual value of a paradox.
Right. They are applying a strict metric of clarity. It's essentially theological Occam's razor.
Exactly.
The AI is saying that a text requiring you to navigate a complex divine family or decode a massive pantheon of avatars or wrestle with how a localized human figure can also be the omnipresent creator of the universe.
It naturally requires more computational overhead.
More interpretive gymnastics.
Yes, compared to a text that just drops the shahada. There is no God but God.
The Qur'an is binary. It's direct. It's mathematically singular.
If we zoom out and consider the premise of the prompt mind seeking pure revelation without cultural training wheels, think about a rational seeker starting from absolute zero.
They don't have a theology degree.
No, they don't have the benefit of centuries of ecumenical church councils like Nicaea or Chalcedon to explain the complex mysteries of the Trinity to them.
They don't have a lineage of Vedic gurus to guide them through the nuances of non-dualism.
They just have the raw text.
Right.
For that specific, unaided seeker looking for a straightforward, singular origin point for the universe, the Qur'an's directness is unparalleled.
ChatGPT explicitly notes in its response that the text does not ask the reader to navigate a pantheon, decode a divine family, reconcile plurality within deity, or treat a human figure as an object of worship.
It provides an immovable anchor.
It does not demand what the AI calls a blind metaphysical surrender to incoherence.
It states its singular premise clearly and defends it relentlessly from page 1 to the end.
And speaking of defending it, that transitions us perfectly from what the text says to how the text argues for it.
Ah, yes, the rational framework.
This brings us to Gemini's incredibly detailed dive into the criterion of rational intelligibility. This is where the source material gets deeply analytical.
It really does.
I'm always fascinated by how ancient texts try to convince you. Usually it's just, believe this because I said so, and if you don't, you'll be punished.
It demands blind faith.
Right. But Gemini scored this text uniquely high on logic. How is it actually proving its point? Is it using philosophical proofs?
Gemini's analysis here is perhaps the most fascinating part of the experiment because it zeroes in on the specific epistemic framework the Qur'an uses.
Break that down.
Gemini points out that the text deliberately avoids abstract, convoluted metaphysical proofs. It doesn't read like Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas.
So it's not super dense philosophy?
No. Instead, it relies on a minimalist logic built on two concepts.
Yeah.
Burhan, which translates roughly to clear deductive proof, and fitra, which refers to the innate, intuitive human disposition to recognize truth.
Intuition and deduction.
Exactly. The text doesn't ask you to learn a complex philosophical vocabulary. It essentially says, look at the physical reality in front of you, look at your own existence, and use your basic deductive reasoning.
Yes, and Gemini highlights a specific verse that sets up a brilliant, almost inescapable logical puzzle.
The trilemma.
It's a trilemma about existence itself. The verse asks the reader, essentially, were they created by nothing, or were they themselves the creators?
Let's break down the mechanics of this trilemma because it's foundational to why the AI respects the text's logic.
The text forces the human intellect to confront the origin of its own existence by offering a multiple-choice question where the wrong answers self-destruct.
Right. The first option it presents is self-creation. Did the universe or did humanity create itself?
And rationally, philosophically, that is an absurdity.
Completely. For something to create itself, it would have to possess agency, will, and power before it even existed.
It would have to both be and not be at the exact same moment.
It's a total violation of the law of non-contradiction. The AI recognizes this instantly. Self-creation is logically invalid.
Okay, so cross off self-creation. The text then forces you to the second option. Were they created by nothing?
Did the universe, all of its physical laws and human consciousness, just pop into existence from absolute pure non-existence?
Right. How does the AI evaluate that?
This is where the AI evaluates the text's alignment with classical logic, specifically the principle of sufficient reason.
Which means?
When the AI looks at the concept of nothing, it recognizes a mathematical and philosophical void. Think of it this way. Every effect must have a cause that is sufficient, meaning capable of producing it.
If you see an apple sitting on a table, you know an apple tree produced it.
The tree has the sufficient properties to generate an apple. Nothingness is not a substance.
It has no properties.
It has no potentiality, it has no agency, and it cannot initiate an action. From nothing, nothing comes.
Therefore, the universe is what philosophers call contingent, meaning its existence relies on something outside itself.
It couldn't just spontaneously generate from a void without a catalyst.
Now, I know someone listening is immediately thinking about quantum mechanics.
Oh, inevitably.
They're saying, wait, quantum physics says particles can pop in and out of existence in a vacuum.
But even in quantum field theory, the vacuum isn't nothing.
Exactly. It's a seething field of energy governed by highly specific physical laws. It has properties. It has potential.
The Qur'an is asking about absolute philosophical nothingness, the absence of the quantum field itself.
And the text points out that your intellect rejects the idea that a complex, ordered universe sprang from an absolute lack of anything.
So if we didn't create ourselves, and we didn't come from nothing,
The trilemma systematically forces the mind into a corner where only one logical anchor remains.
a necessary external cause.
Right.
By systematically eliminating the first two impossibilities, self-creation and spontaneous generation from nothing, the text drives the intellect to the unavoidable necessity of an independent, uncaused first cause.
And what's crucial here, as Gemini notes, is how precisely this defines God.
The text isn't defining God as a super powerful being sitting on a cloud inside the universe, subject to time and space.
Yeah. It defines God as the necessary external ground of all contingent existence.
It is a rigorous, deductive conclusion arrived at by process of elimination.
It's formal logic embedded in ancient poetry.
It really is.
And then Gemini brings up another specific argument the text relies on heavily, the argument from design, or taskir.
Yes.
This is the text's constant referencing of the natural world. It points to planetary orbits, the water cycle, the biology of a seed, the alternation of night and day.
And frames them as evidence of a directing will.
But Gemini makes a distinction here that is absolutely critical for the modern listener. It notes that the text's use of nature is not a God of the gaps argument.
Right. The God of the gaps is a classic logical fallacy.
Explain that for the listener.
It's the trap many religious arguments fall into. It essentially uses God as duct tape to cover the holes in human scientific knowledge.
Like, I don't know how this works, so God did it.
Exactly. It says, we don't understand how lightning works, therefore God must be physically throwing the lightning bolts.
The problem with that theology is that as science advances and we discover atmospheric electromagnetism, the gap closes.
And that version of God shrinks into irrelevance.
Right. What Gemini is pointing out is that the Qur'an's argument operates in the exact opposite direction.
It's not based on what we don't know.
It's based on what we do know.
Precisely. The text is not pointing to the chaotic or the unexplained. It's pointing to the predictable, the mathematical, and the intelligible.
It is arguing that the mathematical regularity of the cosmos, the finely tuned laws of physics,
And the very fact that the universe is orderly and capable of being understood by the human mind.
is itself the definitive proof of an ordering intelligence.
Why does a mathematical equation describing gravity work everywhere in the observable universe?
The presence of uniform laws, not the gaps in our knowledge, is what the text points to as evidence of taskir.
A universe subjected to a singular will.
That is a massive epistemological distinction. It's saying science doesn't threaten the premise, science is the premise. And that leads right into the final piece of Gemini's logical breakdown, which is the text's absolute rejection of infinite regress.
Ah, al-Qayyum.
Yes, the text constantly insists on an attribute of God it calls al-Qayyum, which translates to the self-subsistent or the sustainer. Let's visualize infinite regress.
The train analogy is great for this.
Yeah, imagine you're standing at a railroad crossing, watching an infinitely long freight train roll by. You look at a boxcar and you know it's moving because it's being pulled by the boxcar immediately in front of it.
And that one's being pulled by the one in front of it, and so on.
Now, even if you propose an infinite number of boxcars stretching back into eternity, if there isn't an engine at the very front, something that actually generates its own power and isn't just passing along borrowed momentum, none of those cars will ever move a single inch.
Because an infinite chain of dependent, pulled objects cannot initiate its own motion.
Right. The train analogy is highly effective.
It is, but to truly capture the concept of al-Qayyum that the AI is recognizing, we have to take it one step further.
Okay, where do we take it?
The AI isn't just looking for an engine. It's looking for an engine that doesn't need fuel from outside itself.
Oh, I see.
If the engine at the front of your train requires someone to shovel coal into it, then the engine is still dependent on an external source. It is still contingent.
It still relies on something else.
Exactly. Al-Qayyum means the self-subsistent. It is the uncaused cause that sustains everything else but requires absolutely nothing to sustain itself.
An infinite chain of moving boxcars without an independent, self-fueling origin point is a logical impossibility.
The motion, the existence, has to originate somewhere independent of the chain.
By insisting on that self-subsistent origin point, the text provides a mathematically sound anchor.
And this ultimately is what satisfies Gemini's demand for rational intelligibility.
The AI evaluates a text that doesn't ask the reader to check their critical thinking skills at the door.
It doesn't rely on emotional manipulation, inherited guilt, or institutional authority.
It actively disciplines human reason.
It walks the reader, step by step, using basic causality and observable reality, to the doorstep of the divine.
It treats the intellect as the primary organ of faith, rather than an obstacle to it.
Which is incredibly rare.
So at this point in the deep dive, we've established that the AIs agree the text is structurally coherent, its definition of God is theistically clear, and its arguments are rationally sound.
Structurally, it's incredibly solid.
But that brings us to the most visceral and frankly the most unsettling criterion of the entire prompt.
The texture of the voice.
Yes. The author asked the AIs to evaluate the texture of the voice. Does the text actually sound like a living God speaking?
This is a huge pivot in the analysis.
The prompt asked if the text functions as direct divine address rather than human reflection. And this is where the divergence between the Qur'an and every other text becomes the most stark.
The textual analysis here is striking. Both ChatGPT and Claude pointed out a fundamental structural difference in how voice is utilized.
How so?
When you run an analysis on the vast majority of global sacred literature, the linguistic structure reveals that they are records about the divine.
Not from the divine.
Right. They are human communities remembering a historical encounter with God, or an apostle writing a theological reflection, or a historian compiling testimonies.
Structurally, they are written in the third person or the human first person.
They say, in the beginning, God created the heavens, or the Lord spoke to Moses, saying.
The Qur'an is fundamentally different in its structural voice.
It is almost entirely constructed in the first-person divine voice. It doesn't say God created. It says, we did not create the heavens and earth in play.
It's speaking to you, not about God.
It completely shifts the locus of authority.
Now, Claude does point out that if you read the Torah, you absolutely get moments of this.
You do. You get the terrifying direct speech of God at Mount Sinai. You get the prophetic declarations of, thus says the Lord.
But Claude notes that those moments are embedded.
They are interwoven into a larger human wrapper.
Genealogies, narrative history, architectural dimensions for temples, and third-person descriptions.
The New Testament is primarily human testimony and human letters reflecting on the life of Jesus.
But Claude does note that there is one major text that serves as a very close competitor on this specific metric of direct address.
The Bhagavad Gita.
Yes. Claude gives the Bhagavad Gita exceptionally high marks here.
Because the bulk of the text features sustained, direct philosophical address from Krishna, speaking explicitly as the supreme divine.
It is a long, continuous theological discourse.
However, Claude's algorithm highlights a subtle but structurally vital difference in the metadata of the text.
The narrative frame.
Exactly. The Gita's direct divine address is softened by its epic frame. The text is a chapter within the massive epic, the Mahabharata.
The discourse takes place on a battlefield. It's a dialogue between Krishna and the warrior Arjuna.
And crucially, the entire conversation is mediated through a narrator named Sanjaya, who is recounting the events to a blind king.
So there is a narrative envelope surrounding the divine speech.
It is a story containing a revelation.
And the Qur'an lacks that envelope entirely.
Completely.
There is no frame. There is no prelude setting the scene. There is no narrator introducing the speaker.
There is no, and then Muhammad went to the cave and God said.
The text simply begins to speak.
It just speaks.
And ChatGPT makes a point about this lack of a narrative frame that I found to be the most compelling insight of the entire essay.
Oh, about the relationship with the reader.
Yes. It notes that this sustained density of direct, unmediated address fundamentally alters the relationship between the reader and the book.
It changes everything.
Usually when we read a book, even a sacred one, we're the subject, and the book is the object.
We hold it in our hands, we sit back in our chair, we critique it, we think about what the human author meant.
We analyze the historical context. We are in control.
But ChatGPT says the Qur'an forcefully flips that dynamic.
It turns you, the reader, into the objects being analyzed. It interrogates you.
It refuses to let you remain a detached observer. It constantly breaks the fourth wall, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. It speaks directly to your pride, your economic greed, your grief, your cognitive dissonance, your self-deception.
It asks you questions.
Where then are you going? Did you think we created you without purpose?
It's very intense.
So I'm looking at this from the perspective of the moral seriousness metric the AIs were asked to evaluate. Frankly, a text that reads like a severe, omniscient judge cross-examining your inner monologue sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting.
Wouldn't an AI prefer a text that promotes universal harmony and soothing comfort? Why does this interrogation score high for moral seriousness?
Well, you're assuming the AI evaluates moral seriousness based on what makes humans feel comfortable or peaceful.
Which it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
The AI defines moral seriousness as the weight, gravity, and unyielding demand of the ethical framework presented.
A text that intends to be an actual universe-altering divine revelation shouldn't read like a self-help book.
Exactly. It shouldn't just be an interesting philosophical puzzle or a comforting bedtime story to soothe existential dread.
It intends to judge, to awaken, and to command.
It refuses to flatter the reader or lull them into spiritual vanity. The essay compares its severe ethical gravity to the uncompromising nature of the Torah, or the Sermon on the Mount.
But the relentless directness of the first-person address gives it a peculiar, inescapable weight.
Claude even points out that this severity, particularly regarding the stark consequences for unbelievers or specific rigid societal and legal rulings, creates genuine friction and tension points for a modern liberal reader.
But from the AI's purely structural perspective, that uncompromising severity is the exact proof of its moral seriousness.
It reads like a sovereign dictating reality, not an entertainer seeking a demographic.
It's not trying to win a popularity contest. It's laying down the law of the universe and telling you to align with it or face the consequences.
That is moral seriousness to an AI.
Okay, so if we take everything the AI has found so far, we have a text that is mathematically clean, rationally argued, internally coherent, and speaks with a severe, interrogating, direct divine voice.
This is a very robust structural profile.
But this raises a massive practical historical question. Let's pivot to the real world for a second.
Okay.
Even if you have the perfect structural idea, human beings ruin everything.
History definitely proves this.
The second a pure idea is spoken, humans build bureaucracies around it. We hoard power. We create priestly classes to act as gatekeepers. We twist the original words to justify our own greed or our own wars.
And co-opt it.
Right. If this text is so perfectly structured, did the AI find any mechanism inside the code that protects it from us? From human corruption?
This is where ChatGPT offered what I consider its most profound, meta-level observation of the entire experiment.
What did it find?
The language model noted that the Qur'an possesses a rare, highly developed self-awareness regarding human sociology.
Self-awareness.
It acts not just as a theological revelation, but as an active, predictive diagnostic tool for religious corruption itself.
That is wild.
It anticipates exactly what human beings are going to do to the revelation after they receive it.
Give me an example of that. How does a text predict its own mishandling?
It does so by explicitly embedding warnings against the mechanisms of corruption directly into the central theology.
So it calls it out before it happens.
Yes. The text contains repeated severe warnings against the instrumentalization of religion for worldly gain. It warns scholars not to distort the text or conceal the truth for a small price.
And what about the clergy?
Crucially, it contains fierce anti-clergy warnings. It explicitly condemns the historical practice of turning rabbis, monks, priests, or holy men into infallible authorities beside God.
So it attacks the hierarchy.
It mocks the idea of blindly following inherited cultural religion simply because it is what our fathers did.
It constantly diagnoses the exact sociological mechanisms by which a pure, direct revelation decays into a bloated, corrupt, institutional religion.
As someone who studies decentralized systems, you must find that fascinating.
It is. Think about the original prompt again. The prompt specifically commanded the AI to set aside all inherited religion, institutions, clergy, and culture. The AI was tasked with finding the text that stands strongest without all that human machinery.
And what ChatGPT found was a text that actively, explicitly warns the reader against trusting that very machinery.
Because the Qur'an tells the reader not to trust the priesthood, not to rely on intermediaries, and constantly pushes the individual reader back to the direct, unmediated text.
It functions like an open-source protocol that actively fights centralization.
That is exactly it. It has a built-in defense mechanism against institutional capture.
That is exactly the dynamic the AI identified. It is structurally armored against the very institutions the prompt asked the AI to remove.
As ChatGPT concluded in its analysis, this unique feature means the revelation itself resists capture more visibly than many rivals.
It is not dependent on a specific lineage of ordained priests to interpret it for the masses.
And it doesn't require a specific physical temple to house it.
The text is designed to function as a direct, unmediated peer-to-peer link between the consciousness of the individual reader and the creator.
And that structural independence, that refusal to be co-opted by a hierarchy, is a major reason why it won the AI's clinical evaluation.
It's the ultimate safeguard.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this deep dive. We've looked at the blueprint.
We have.
We've walked through the coherent architecture, the rational logic of the trilemma, the unyielding first-person voice, and the self-aware defense mechanisms of the text.
But we have to bring it all back to a final, brutally honest, philosophical caveat provided by Claude in the source material.
Yes, the Claude asterisk.
Claude lays out all the data points for why the Qur'an won this specific, highly constrained analytical exercise. It is a single, coherent, rationally argued, theistically clear text that uses direct divine address and resists institutional capture.
But then Claude adds an asterisk that we all need to deeply consider.
Yes, and it is a necessary boundary on what AI can actually tell us about reality.
Right.
Claude states that the Qur'an wins this exercise because it appears self-consciously designed to maximize precisely these properties.
The architecture is absolutely flawless for the specific prompt given.
But, as Claude astutely notes, an algorithm cannot answer the ultimate metaphysical question.
Because it's just code analyzing code.
Exactly. Whether this flawless textual design reflects actual, literal divine origin, a living creator actually speaking into the timeline of human history, or whether it represents the absolute, unparalleled pinnacle of human genius at constructing the perfect, impenetrable revelation text.
That is the one question that algorithms, syntax trees, and structural analysis cannot resolve.
The AI can tell you it has found the most perfectly constructed vehicle in existence, but it cannot look outside the simulation to tell you who built the engine.
And that is exactly the profound space I want to leave you, the listener, standing in today.
It's quite a space to be in.
We started this hour by imagining a void, a world stripped of all religious institutions and cultural baggage. We looked at the world's scriptures through the cold, impartial, ultrasonic eyes of an artificial intelligence that evaluates texts based purely on logic, coherence, and structural purity.
And the AI pointed to one specific text that masters that mathematical architectural purity.
But here is the final provocative thought I want you to chew on as someone who loves to learn and understand how humans interact with systems.
I'm ready.
If an artificial intelligence, a mind made of pure logic, finds that this text is perfectly optimized to survive without a priesthood, without a narrative frame, and without complex, messy, metaphysical contradictions, we have to ask ourselves a deeply human question.
What is that?
Is perfect structural logic what the human soul actually craves in a religion?
Well, that's a great question.
We know it's what a computer craves. We know an AI wants binary clarity. But do we, as messy, emotional, historically grounded humans, actually need the layered, evolving, heavily narrated, deeply human stories found in other traditions?
Do the tensions, the multiple authors, the parables, and the narrative struggles of other faiths provide some vital nourishment that a perfectly logical, severe AI simply cannot compute?
Or, in an increasingly chaotic, uncertain, and fragmented world, is the pure, unmediated, mathematically precise voice of a singular creator exactly the unbreakable anchor we need?
It is a profound, lingering question.
Yeah.
It asks us to look in the mirror and consider whether our ultimate truth should look like a flawless mathematical equation or a complex, evolving human story.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. We encourage you to approach whatever sources you read next, whether they are ancient scriptures, history books, or even just the daily news, with the same level of clinical structural curiosity.
Strip away the frosting, look at the ingredients, and ask yourself how the system was built.
We'll catch you next time.